Shakespeare is a world-renowned author who lived between 1564 and 1616. He is credited with notable works such as Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Macbeth. These writings are widely regarded as some of the best in the history of the English language and are famous for connecting people and adding hundreds of new words to our vocabulary. But is it possible that someone else was responsible for his plays? Some theories suggest that there is reasonable doubt that the author of Shakespeare's writings is who he thought he was. One of the main people that are suspected to be an alternative author to Shakespeare's works is Sir Francis Bacon. Sir Francis Bacon was a lawyer and more of an insider in scientific groups, so it is possible he would have had the means to tackle subjects covered in Shakespeare's plays. He was also one of the early advocates of the scientific method. Francis Bacon served as an attorney general and Lord Chancellor, so it is said that he may have used Shakespeare as a front for his writings, so as not to ruin his reputation as a well-respected statesman. He was also a skilled cryptologist, which adds to the interest of this theory, as some people believe there are hidden messages in Shakespeare's writings. The theory that Edward de Vere, who was the 17th Earl of Oxford, wrote Shakespeare's works is sometimes referred to as Oxfordian theory. Proponents of this theory argue that there are parallels between events in the Earl's life and the plots of Shakespeare's plays. The first book ever written on the topic of alternative authors of Shakespeare was called The Philosophy of the Plays of Shakespeare Unfolded, and was written by Delia Bacon in 1857. Although the book is mostly about Sir Francis Bacon, it does mention Edward de Vere as a possible co-author and purports that there may have been a group that used Shakespeare as a cover-up for their writing instead of just a single secret author. To top it off, his death in 1604 coincided with the end of Shakespeare publishing new works. Delia Bacon was often dismissed as a madwoman, and she spent the later years of her life in an insane asylum. While it is true that many of the claims in her books are without evidence, she was one of the first people to propose that Shakespeare's works were collaborative. In fact, new studies done in 2016 by Oxford University Press suggest that approximately 38% of Shakespeare's works were collaborative. This is where Christopher Marlowe comes in. Christopher Marlowe was a poet and playwright who lived between 1564 and 1593. Beyond just a theory, Christopher Marlowe has recently been credited as a co-author of Shakespeare's Henry VI in the new Oxford edition of Shakespeare published by Oxford University Press. It was edited by 4 scholars on Shakespeare and put under rigorous peer review. One of the editors, Gary Taylor of Florida State University, said that they came to the decision to add Marlowe as a co-author after analyzing the similarities in vocabulary of plays written by him and that of Henry VI. However, it is still up to people to make up their own minds about the validity of this attribution. It is also a possibility that as a fellow playwright of the time, Christopher Marlowe's vocabulary could have simply influenced Shakespeare's or the actors who performed his plays. It is widely accepted today that Shakespeare probably collaborated on some of his plays while he was learning the ropes. We know that there was a man named Shakespeare who was born in Stratford, England, and worked as an actor. Shakespeare did not attend college, and there is no known record of his school attendance, yet his works would suggest that he had an extremely wide vocabulary. Therefore, a second argument is that Shakespeare did not have the technical knowledge of law or science to match the substance of his works. It's also noted that Shakespeare's works speak of foreign lands that a small town boy would not have knowledge of. But Stratfordians, those who believe that Shakespeare was the true author, state that he could have made up for his lack of travel with imagination. Stylometrics may prove that the alternative authors could not have written Shakespeare, as their writing styles don't always line up with those of Shakespeare's. They do indeed show his works were probably written by a single person, but this does not definitively prove that they were written by Shakespeare. People also tend to point out that William Shakespeare's will is poorly written and mentions nothing about what he would like to be done with his works when he passes. It would seem like someone with as expansive a collection of works as Shakespeare would at least make some note about what he would like done with them. There is very little information about William Shakespeare available to us, and next to no evidence that links him to the writing attributed to him. But Stratfordians argue that what evidence we do have suggests William Shakespeare is our guy, and until convincing evidence comes out that suggests otherwise, we are compelled to believe this to be true. They make the argument that a noble such as Sir Francis Bacon would not have been able to write about the life of a peasant in such detail as was written in works like A Midsummer Night's Dream. Perhaps in this situation we should apply Occam's razor, which insists that the simplest answer is usually correct. Even if Shakespeare only attended a grammar school, it would have been a sufficient start for life as a writer. In such schools, young boys studied and memorized vast collections of classical texts and dramas. It also should be noted that playwrights often did not publish their own works at this time, so it was not uncommon. Although some people may simply write off these ideas as crazy conspiracy theories, it is important for us to look at these kinds of questions seriously. Looking at history with a critical eye can help us weed out information that might be biased or only loosely based in fact. Perhaps one of the most important reasons that these kinds of theories should be looked into is it gives us a better understanding of our own history. Ultimately, there is insufficient evidence to prove that someone else wrote Shakespeare's works. Many of these theories are used to fill in the blanks of what we don't know about Shakespeare's life. But the point still remains that even by examining and disproving these theories, we can gain insight into the methods Shakespeare may have used to write his works. To quote University of Warwick professor Carol Rudder, we have really stopped thinking about the richness of the writing experience in the early modern theater, and by crediting Marlowe, people like Gary Taylor are making us attend to that. Even if we have disproven the theories of an alternative author, what we have found along the way has helped us paint a more vivid picture of who Shakespeare was.